Hello, welcome to the latest episode of Comics Unmasked, the podcast formerly known as the Untitled Comics Podcast. I'm here again with the usual folks, and if you'd like to introduce our topic for the week.
Yeah, so this has kind of come out of recently. DC had their Infinite Frontier Zero issue, which has a lot of creative teams on it. But it reminded me of an issue that's been going on for a few years now, and that is the devaluing of artists, especially at the big two. Through various reasons, they've wanted to avoid delays and double shipping. And what I mean by this is where instead of having a writer and an artist be consistent on a run as a team over many issues, what tends to happen now is you get at best 6 issues with a team, and then you'll have another arc with a different artist entirely, and that's at best.
At DC, it's significantly usually worse. Than that.
It is, yes. It's often you get maybe 2 or 3 issues.
Out of the big two, Marvel is better at handling this and generally find a solid narrative reason for the shift. Like, I recently hopped back into Wonder Woman.
Yes. Do you start with the Tamaki run?
Yes.
Which was announced as Tamaki and Mikhail Yanin.
Yes, and I did not stay on the book long, just because, like, 2-3 issues in, the artist started shifting issues.
You get 2 issues of Yanin, I believe, because I was very angry about this at the time. If you watch my other show, the Comics in the Multiverse, because Yanin's art is fantastic. I think he's one of DC's best current artists anyway. But what I loved about his work on that book specifically was the layout work. I thought it was really inventive. And then we switched to just, I don't remember who it was. It wasn't bad. It wasn't terrible art. But it didn't have the flair, and it just shifted to, these are just standard layouts. It was fine. Like if the book had started with that, I probably wouldn't have complained about it. But it was a noticeable downgrade.
Like, DC had sold you.
This is a Tamaki and Yanin book, and it wasn't. And this has been going on with DC longer, but it really picked up at the start of Rebirth, where they started doing the double shipping.
Because of the double shipping, that double shipping causes.
It does, and they started when they announced all the teams, they actually announced them with multiple artists, with the intention being they would get a 6-issue arc, rotate to the next artist, and and alternate back and forth.
Which is a fine way of doing it.
I could live with that. Yeah.
I remember like the most egregious example of like something like this pissing me off as a reader, and it's not a particularly fondly remembered run for many, but I really enjoyed it. Was Grant Morrison's Action Comics run that kicked off the New 52 which was a 17-18 issue run, I think, that was basically kind of a revised origin story for Superman. And
Morales drew most of that.
Morales did draw most of it,
was kind of the top billed artist and was advertised as being the main artist. And I think when it got to like the last 2 issues that the whole thing had been building up to, I think they had 3 or 4 different artists doing one issue together, because Rags Morales is a notoriously slow artist, and the artist that they chose to draw the pages that he didn't even look anything like Rags Morales. It was one that was doing kind of more painted style artwork and stuff, and it just created this massive discord in the narrative.
It's
I'm not.
No, it is because at the start of the New 52 especially, DC had a mantra of there will be no delays. Like, come hell or high water, because they had every book came out on a set Wednesday of the month. So you had your week 1 books, your week 2 books, etc.
Yeah.
And they would not move those, no matter what. They would get fill-in artists. They would throw anything at it.
Yeah.
But it led to
I feel like Rags Morales is a fucking fantastic artist and probably one of my favorite artists in superhero comics ever. And, you have that artistry is compromised through that kind of business-like.
You had along the at the exact same time. We had Wonder Woman by Azzarello, and
Yes.
primarily with Cliff Chang. But Cliff
Great
Chang's
book.
on only about half the issues, maybe. And most of the other fill-in issues, I believe, was Tony Akins, which again, not a bad artist.
The styles did at least somewhat mesh.
Yes, they did. At least, I mean, I'll be honest, I'm not super familiar with Tony Akins' work elsewhere, so I don't know if that is his normal style and it was well picked from the editorial office, or if it was him making a conscious effort to try and imitate Chang's style, which fair play to him if he did. But either way, again, he's not a bad artist, but it's still a noticeable downgrade. And you felt it every time you got to one of those issues, or sometimes it was 2 or 3 issues in a row. Then you get one Chang issue, and then back to Akins.
It's also worth noting that throughout the entire New 52, outside of the occasional outlier like that Wonder Woman one, DC had an aggressive house style.
Yeah.
Yes, Jim Lee adjacent.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
they got
didn't really
better
break
with that
until DCU.
Yeah, well,
really controversial right now. I really dislike Jim Lee as an artist.
I don't love him as an artist. I think I really like him as a person. I think he's incredibly passionate. He does a lot, great charity work. I think his art is fine.
I think Jim Lee's art is very good at what it is.
Yeah. It's just he makes everything look like this massive pull-out poster, and I think we were talking about this last week, like the practice of kind of cartooning, of simplifying reality to make it more so.
He over details.
He doesn't do that. He just makes everything look like a poster, and my eyes will get wary looking at his work because it's a strain taking in all the information.
He comes from the era of pouches.
Yeah,
that's the area he came up through,
and that's why, because it was mostly his designs for all the characters at the start of the New 52.
Yeah,
it's really heavy on the cross hatching and all the detail and the collars. Yeah, very over designed, very busy. I don't think it's bad. I think it's a taste thing. I do think, again, he's also not a fast artist, or at least not anymore. But when he has the time, I think his work is pretty good.
Yeah,
there are times, places, and I think if you want a Jim Lee style superhero book, Jim Lee's very good at a Jim, and
surprisingly,
evident that he's very good at it. In the fact that you can say, Jim Lee style, and none of you are going to have a problem knowing what I'm evoking. With that, and it has its place. Hush, I still think is a fantastic looking book. It's not a great book, but I think
on Hush. I mean, maybe we'll do an episode on this down the line, but I think Hush is a wonderful introduction to Batman for people.
I've described Hush as a terrible Batman story that's great at introducing people to comics.
It's a wonderful, baby's first Batman story for people.
Everyone is in it.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's a very
it's
obvious
greatest hits.
attempt to capture or kind of redo the kind of Long Halloween type storyline, and it doesn't have the dramatic weight of it, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I say, it's not the best story, but I do think there is a place for Jim Lee's style, and there should be those books for people who want them. The problem is when that's the house style and everything looks like that, and you get bored of it. That's when it's a problem.
Yeah.
Hush does have its lasting effects on the. Plot-wise, at least, on the world.
Unfortunately,
it's the book that brought Jason Todd back.
Yeah,
and Hush himself.
Yeah, no one remembers Hush anymore.
He was around not that long ago, I'm sure.
Wasn't he in a live action thing something recently?
Can't remember.
In one of the CW shows, maybe, or one of the.
They might have been teasing something to do with Hush in the Batwoman show, but I stopped watching it.
Yeah, maybe that was it.
Dinny did really good things with Hush.
Hush, Streets, all that Dinny detective stuff.
Yeah,
is fantastic from that period.
It's the only time I've
23
enjoyed
there.
Hush as a character.
Yeah, it's really good if you can get your hands on it. So I think it's all horrifically out of
There's
print.
an omnibus out right now, right? Of Paul
Yes.
Dini's Batman stuff.
Yeah,
Oh,
there's
is there now?
His whole detective one is collected. And maybe his Streets of Gotham as well.
I think it is, yeah.
Because it was
That's
running
nice.
concurrently with
Yeah.
Morrison's Batman.
Right.
It's Morrison's Batman that, for obvious reasons, everyone remembers, and
Is wonderful in its own right.
it's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's probably one of my favourite runs in superhero comics.
Yeah. And I don't care what people say. I think Final Crisis is one of the best things I've ever read.
I don't think you'll get any arguments from that on this show.
It's
No.
so good.
If you're going to
Saying
do
that,
an event...
I wasn't reading it one a month as it was coming out. I read it years later collected, which was obviously a much smoother reading experience than...
I read it in the
people
trade
had.
as soon as the trade came out.
Yeah. But I mean, you mentioned a different reading experience. I think, that is part of, to get back on topic, the problem is it's one thing reading it monthly. It's easier to live with the shifting artists, I think.
Yeah.
Because, all right, you've got usually anywhere between 3 and 6 weeks between issues, depending on when they fall in the month. Your brain kind of forgets a little bit what the last issue looked like, and you just read this issue relatively fresh. As soon as it it comes to a later date. I mean, even James, you just said you read that Wonder Woman Tamaki stuff. That only started, I don't know, about a year ago.
Yeah.
If that, it's not an old run, but you read it as a mostly, started to read it as a mostly, here's a trade essentially.
No, I was reading it monthly as it was coming out.
Oh, were you? Okay.
Yeah.
I thought you went back and tried that. But I mean, you could read that now and it would be a horrible trade because it would jump all over the place. And that's a recent thing.
For a company...
I think like a lot of where this comes from as well, right, is like, the monthly schedule or occasionally bi-monthly schedule, is a leftover of the era of the 60s when comics had more simplified artwork, and so it's no surprise that Steve Ditko and Jack Kirby could work. Well, it's always a surprise at how fast Jack Kirby could draw.
Yeah, I have no idea how Kirby...
That man was a monster.
Yeah. I mean, comparatively, their artwork compared to someone like Alex Maleev or...
it's a lot simpler, less detail. You're very evocative and striking, but there's less detail fundamentally.
Exactly. And I feel like, we see... if you move your gaze away from like the big two and you look at things like Image, like Fiona Staples and Saga and things like this, they will take frequent breaks to allow a consistent artistic look because the artwork is that much more complex.
Yeah.
Since then,
I get why, and that is the main problem. Marvel and DC do not have the luxury of being able to... And luxury is maybe not the right word, but they can't take...
Do you know what? I'm gonna in just a second, I'm gonna credit a book that you will be surprised with me crediting specifically for how it's handled this. But just on, just to explain what the Image system is for people who aren't familiar, they have two typical approaches. One is after every arc or so, usually 6 issues, they will take typically a 3-month break, and in that middle month they'll release the trade and then come back. Some books is longer, it's a bit more flexible, it isn't nailed down, but that's a rule of thumb. And the other thing is they will sometimes have guest artists do an issue or 2 issues and then come back for the main artist with the rest of it. And I think that is the approach DC could learn from.
Yes.
And one of the few books, and Marvel as well, but I think we're harping on DC here because they're worse at it. One of the few books in the last few years that I think did a wonderful job of exactly that, I can't believe I'm going to praise this book, is Tom King's Batman run.
Yeah, it did do...
Especially, so early on, it actually stuck to that promise of alternating artists. I think it was Yanin and I want to say Finch was the second artist on the other arc.
Dave Finch.
Yes.
Yeah.
I believe so. So that they alternated for a couple of arcs at the start pretty consistently.
There's a point where Finch shifted whoever was inking him, and all of a sudden I really enjoyed his art.
Yeah.
Like whoever back at the start of a New 52 and kind of just before it, whoever was inking Finch wasn't doing him any favors.
I agree. I thought I hated Finch until I saw his pencils.
Yeah.
which
and
again,
fantastic.
I mean, credit and ink is another thing we'll get to, I'm sure. But what Tom King's run did is he still had, Yanin was a consistent collaborator throughout the run.
Yeah.
Maybe not every other arc by the end, but he was off and on. But he pulled in some magnificent artists, and he would often. There are absolutely points where there are 2-issue stories where it has very been publicly said, no, we weren't actually on schedule to hit the next arc where we needed to, so I wrote in an extra 2-issue arc with a different artist, just to throw in as all right, we can throw in a 2-issue break here and let our artist get on schedule, get back on track.
So they know it works.
They know it works, and it was a relatively successful run still. And my God, a lot of artists, but the quality of artists on that run, you've got Lee Weeks, you got Jorge Fornes, so good, and that is what led to Tom King doing these 12-issue series, well now 8 issues as well, with one artist or 2 in the case of Strange Adventures, but. That's again an artistic choice to have those 2 artists, not just we need 2 artists.
I think the reason DC is allowing Tom King to do those, and also part of the reason for the creation of Black Label, beyond more adult-oriented DC stories, is for a company that knows the importance of a trade. Because DC does. DC gets trades in a way Marvel.
They learn with the success of Watchmen, basically.
Yeah. They understand that evergreen books are important.
I mean, Watchmen will still regularly hit now, your monthly bestsellers lists in your bookstores.
But I think they realised because of how monthlies were, they weren't creating any new.
Yes.
Things like that.
Very rarely.
Which is why I don't think you'll see Tom King on anything but those kind of series for a long time with DC, because I think DC want him to just
up those out.
Yeah, because they know they're going to sell.
They do. They sell incredibly well in the direct market as well, just as single issues, which is obviously one of their biggest priorities. They still have to make their money there, and they do. So they're safe bets. They do tend to pair him with wonderful artists who obviously he has good relationships with, like Mitch Gerrards and Doc Shaner. If you follow the 3 of those on Twitter, wonderful banter and a friendship.
I fucking love Doc Shaner as well. Like his 6-issue run on, is it 6 or 7 or 8? His 6-issue run on Flash Gordon with at Dynamite.
Yes.
I think
That's
Jeff Parker wrote
such a Doc Shaner book, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it was so good. And for myself, as a fan of like the original Alex Raymond Flash Gordon, I think I showed a page from it last week. It was great seeing kind of a semi-serious modern take on the source material that didn't have the shadow of the movie hanging over it. And I think Doc Shaner's artwork really captured that sort of glee that you're supposed to feel when you read the Flash Gordon stuff.
There's a reason he's still the go-to artist for all the Silver Age omnibus stuff.
Yeah.
Like whenever they need a new cover dress for those.
Quest stuff as well.
Yeah.
He's still the dream for a Shazam book, right?
Yeah. I mean, he's done the odd issue here or there, and it's spectacular.
Hey, Shazadam is now a thing.
Not doing that. Not going there. We're not talking about Shazadam, damn it.
No, you have an entirely separate podcast where I'm certain you're going to talk about Shazadam.
It's bullshit. It's all about a bullshit. It's nothing. It's a throwaway line.
It's a joke it is a joke in the book, yes.
Oh.
But in terms of, like, as we were saying about fill-in artists, I think one run that it has a fill-in artist for the middle, maybe the third quarter of the run, is the original stretch of Marvel's Dark Tower series, Stephen King Dark Tower series, which a good 2/3 to 3/4 of it is illustrated by Jay Lee, who absolutely, like, as far as I'm concerned now, visually defines that universe, has made it his world. And
I get why he'd be such an amazing fit for that with his gothic style.
Yeah, he's just phenomenal, and he captures the sweep and the romance and the mythology of it. But he stepped away for the third to last and second to last run miniseries, 6-issue miniseries of it. And the fill-in artist was actually the person who'd been coloring his work for the rest of the run, which was Richard Izanovi, if that's how you pronounce his name. Apologies if I've got it wrong. But Izanovi had been coloring the rest of Jay Lee's run on it, and had kind of given it this really psychedelic, nightmarish look that really worked with the story. And so when it transitioned to him drawing the run, he obviously doesn't have the very unique Jay Lee look. I think he's one of those few artists these days where you can see a Jay Lee drawing
there's no one else like it.
Know who it is.
Yeah.
Richard Isinovi doesn't quite pull that off, but because of the color and because he kind of obviously been coloring the rest of the run, and Jay Lee's got a really interesting use of negative space. He leaves quite a lot of blank area in his work to let atmosphere fill in, and he kind of tends to have quite minimal backgrounds as well. And Isinovi was able to carry that over into his segments that he drew. And then when Isinovi returned for the final miniseries arc of the first stretch of the comics, it was kind of a seamless transition, and it worked really well.
You've hit the nail on the head there, because we do have I accept that there are going to be fill-in artists in monthly books because artists need breaks. That's the reality of it, and I get that they're not going to delay indefinitely.
It's worth spinning this into how Marvel tend to handle this kind of thing, because we've talked about DC a lot here.
Yeah, but on that, I do think colorists are the unsung heroes of keeping the book consistent across these fill-in artists. Because you can have vastly different line work, but if your color palette is incredibly consistent, you can get away with a lot more than you would think if you're just looking at the black and white images.
It's just things like, Dave Stewart's work and all the Mignolaverse stuff. Even though you've got a huge variety of artists, there is this sort of through line running through it, and it's because it's fucking Dave Stewart coloring everything like a madman. And
I do not understand the amount of work colorists take on. It is scary, because there are a handful of them, like Geordie Belair. Her name is everywhere, absolutely everywhere. Like, it's scary.
This is perhaps something that I can bring myself as an artist. So that the process of coloring that's most frequent nowadays because of digital coloring is there's basically 2 stages to it. And some colorists like Dave Stewart and what's his name, Jacob Phillips, will actually pay somebody to do the first stage for them, which is sort of like basically the first stage is called flatting, and it's when you basically separate all of the color elements out in the panel into block colors. So you've got all of your skin colored the same, so that's one layer. Then another layer might be somebody's wearing a red jumper, so that will be its own layer. And you basically separate each element out into different flatted areas, different flatted layers. And then on top of that, once you've got that separated out, you do the highlights, which will be where you add in shading and texture and all these sort of things to get it to the final stage. And because flatting is a very obvious kind of robotic process, automatic process, a lot of artists like Jacob Phillips and Dave Stewart will pay somebody else to flat it out, because it's a very, very self-explanatory stage,
something that takes fundamentally less skill, I would say.
Exactly, yeah. And like, if the blue isn't the right shade of blue, it's one click of a button and you've changed the color on that layer because it's a block color. So, I have a feeling Dave Stewart and Jacob Phillips color like madmen because they're able to employ people to flatten, to do the.
They basically have their own little coloring studios, essentially.
Yeah. And I mean, I've got no problem with that at all, actually, as an artist, because what makes Dave Stewart, what makes Richard Isinovi, and what makes Jacob Phillips, is the highlighting, is the way that they play with color in that second stage. You don't need to be Jacob Phillips to flat a comic. And I mean, you're talking about pulp earlier, but like the way that pulp is coloured is really interesting. And even though obviously you'll start with a flatting stage, it's that second stage that makes it unique and makes it the experience that Jacob Phillips makes it.
Yeah, the pulp's colouring is what makes that book transcend.
I think it's what's really interesting at Jacob Phillips, especially on those those Brubaker books, is that he is matching an established style that is already there on a lot of those books, right?
Val Staples, I think, coloured it before, and somebody else. I think Val Staples colours on. I think they did the first volume, but they definitely did the second volume onwards.
They had Elizabeth Brightweiser for a long time.
Yeah, that was it. So I think Brightweiser did. What was it? Wrong Time. Yeah, so Val Staples did Coward, Lawless, Dead and the Dying, Bad Night, The Sinners, and Last of the Innocent. And then did one volume of Criminal with Elizabeth Brightweiser, and then they went their separate ways because of politics.
I think Brightweiser did a bit more than just that, though.
Brightweiser
she did the Fade Out as well.
She did Fade Out, Fatal.
Yeah.
I want to say she did
Kill or Be Killed.
Kill or Be Killed as well, yeah.
So she did a lot, but
Criminal went away for a while.
And they did all the other. But, and this, I mean, it's really interesting that, because while I think pulp is magnificently coloured, it's weird where I don't think it's his most original colouring work either, because I think he is fitting into the established style that that this team already has. So again, it's a whole other talent.
His colours on My Heroes Have Always Been Junkies and Bad Weekend really strike out at me as something a bit more inventive than pulp, perhaps. But something that was interesting that I found with the Brightweiser stuff is that I think for all the comics that Brightweiser coloured, Sean Phillips was drawing and inking everything digitally. And when Brightweiser left the team, he went back to his process went back to drawing digitally but inking everything by hand. Which is why I can't believe I haven't shown you guys this yet. I've got sitting over here an original page of comic book artwork from Sean Phillips.
Trying to make everyone jealous.
Yeah. From Bad Weekend.
That is nice.
Still need to hang up.
Yeah, that's take you back a bit.
Yeah. Brightweiser's colours are all done on digital inks, which, I mean, I like the artwork in those books, but I think Phillips is most at home with a brush in his hand, and his
I'd be really interested to
sings more with that,
look at those back to back and see the difference. I've never, maybe it's just I never knew that I'd never looked at the difference. But
I'm not 100% sure who's colouring it. I know Big Car is lettering it, but the colours on Homesick Pilots, and anyone who knows me knows I have a soft spot for neon.
Yeah.
But this is the Casper Wingard book, right?
It is, yeah.
I can't say I've heard of it.
It's relatively new. I think there's only a couple issues out.
Yeah, it's 3 issues in.
Yeah.
It's an image book. Dan Waters, Casper Wingard.
Please have the credits page near the start. I think Wingard might be colouring it himself because the front page credits are Waters, Wingard, and then Bidcar. So I'm assuming that he's colouring as well.
Yeah. Makes sense.
I mean, it's interesting. Like, I think something that Connor mentioned earlier was like, how artists are credited, and oftentimes the names that will be on the front of the book will be the writer, the penciler, and maybe the inker, and the colorist will often be left off. I think of that
DC
process.
Policy now is the colorists are always on the front as well.
Are always on the front as well. That's
but
good.
But the letterers aren't. I don't think.
It's got like better.
A good friend of mine, who goes under the pen name Hesitant Doodle, has just finished drawing the second chapter of her graphic novel Guts, which is like a female wrestling comic. And the second chapter, I've seen it, is about 60 pages long, fully illustrated and coloured and everything. And its Kickstarter has just ended as well. So if you do want to buy it, you have to wait till it goes up on a shop. But it's 60 pages long. It took her the whole year to do 60 pages because she's one person writing, drawing, inking, coloring and designing. You know, one thing we is often left out in this conversation is actual book design, because that's a totally different skill from drawing.
Which again, I know there's a stigma about artists hiring design, especially when it comes to suits or logos.
Yeah,
there is a stigma against artists hiring graphic designers to do these things, which
is always
there shouldn't be.
I know Jonathan Hickman does his own graphic design for his graphic novels.
Who's that?
Jonathan Hickman does his own graphic design, so like all of those text layouts and stuff is all done by Hickman, which gives it, I guess, a more uniform, interesting look. But yeah, like, you know, I've got 6 pages left of the first chapter of my own graphic novel to draw, and I'm already thinking ahead to the design of the layout of the pages, and it's a fucking ball ache. Like, it's probably the most difficult part of putting together a comic, you know, even more so than writing and drawing the actual thing, because you have to think about which pages fall where, and
it's a different skill set.
Yeah, I have a lot of respect for people who are book designers, because it's not an easy thing, and if it works well, you don't notice it, but if it doesn't work well, you do notice it, you know.
Like Chip Kid's book design is generally very good.
I met Chip Kid twice. Lovely man.
Also, again, we talk too much about DC for a podcast that's not meant to be about DC.
Yeah, you wanted to move into the Marvel approach, and I kind of derailed that. Sorry.
The graphic design on DC's new trade dress.
Oh, the Infinite Frontier stuff
is fantastic.
Yeah,
like, you know what? As well as the logo design and most of the titles.
On trade dress, I want to give a shout out to Pulp, because the spine, you know, obviously the cover for anyone else, it's just like orange kind of glow, very striking, but the spine is white and matches next to a lot of their other books, like especially like Reckless, which is a recent one. If it's right next to it, you wouldn't even notice that it's different.
Yeah. There's one graphic design decision on Pulp that once I noticed it, I absolutely hated it.
Please don't ruin it for me.
That's the thing. I don't know whether to say it to you, because once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it.
What was it?
Go on. But I mean, I'm assuming that was Reckless next to Pulp on the book there, yeah? Oh, yeah. God damn it, yeah. No, I had seen that. It's
the logo. It's the way that the typed Arial font overlays the more old-timey Western font, which is a nice idea in and of itself, considering the book takes place across 2 time periods. But the U is off-center, and it hurts me to look at it. And it's the same with the P is also off-center. And the L's okay, but the P over here is also off-center. And every time I look at it, I want to pull my eyes out.
I bet you if you in the digital layering removed the bigger the white letters, I guarantee you if you read it just in the other letters, it would be perfectly centered for that word.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's where they're just not centered with each other because of the font differential.
It really bothers me every time I look at it.
But my point was, I think that is Reckless you've got next to it on the shelf, just to the right of it, and you cannot tell next to that they are completely different series of books.
Yeah,
because they, again, like I say, that striking orange on the front is gone for the spine, just to have it match nicely with a lot of their other works, because they know people will put it next to, for example, Reckless.
I'm really looking forward to book 2 and 3 of this. I think this is one of my favorite things.
It's so good. It's I think April or May is book 2. I think
I've struggled with some of their non-criminal stuff over the past few years, mostly because I think some of their other ongoing series, with the exception of the Fade Out, I think go on for too long and need to wrap up a bit sooner. I'm specifically thinking about Kill or Be Killed and Fatale, where by the end of the run of both those books, I just felt like they'd taken a concept and it was just too much time. I think it could have used about maybe 10 issues being trimmed off, fat-wise. Whereas Criminal, I think, has always been really well contained with each narrative. But like Reckless is just brilliant, and I think it's because even though it's going to be a trilogy of books and maybe more in the future,
it's still fairly self-contained though.
It's still self-contained, yeah. And I was trying to describe to someone else. I basically kind of arrived at the description of it's basically a really good kind of take on like the kind of Jack Reacher anti-hero genre, like kind of a Lee Child paperback in graphic novel form,
I realized something the other day, and actually we've touched on something I'm going to come back to in a second as well. But I've started a lot of Brubaker Phillips series and liked them and never finished them. I finished Fade Out. I've read the first 3 volumes of Criminal. I've read Bad Weekend. I've read Pulp. The rest of them, I've started them all. And Brubaker, but not Phillips, I've read all of Velvet.
I do love Velvet as well, though.
Velvet is good. I was actually thinking, because we were talking about doing a Brubaker Phillips look at. We could take each volume and treat it like a book club for several weeks or months.
I'll be happy to do that.
And go through the entire.
My favorite team in comics.
All I want to say is, I don't want to read Criminal just yet because I really want to wait till these reprinting the deluxes come out so I can read it in that.
Happy. We can wait till because they're not that far away.
A few months, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. We can maybe start as a celebration of those releasing.
Yeah.
I'm
and
very excited.
Sleeper is on DC Infinite.
I've not read Sleeper.
I have the first season on Comixology. I had a long time ago, but I think the rest of it's on DC Infinite, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's good.
But we were talking about graphic novels and how this approach Brubaker and Phillips taking is quite interesting.
Yeah.
And kind of is emulating both the book and the kids' graphic novel market. And DC are playing around with it as well with their young
adult line, and they've got the grade school ones as well.
And great way to introduce characters to kids as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
But the direct market is dying.
Yeah.
There's no escaping.
I'll be surprised if in the
it's
next
inevitable.
5 years we see licensed properties move away from issue content to just fully publishing in graphic novel form. Because there's going to be a lot of Star Wars fans who want to read Star Wars comics and who get confused by.
Well, I mean,
by the
already
issue chronology.
Some Star Wars stuff being printed straight to graphic novels.
Yeah.
There's one coming up for the High Republic, I believe.
Yes.
Maybe you're right. I think what's interesting about the direct market is it is dying. There is no way around that because it hasn't brought in new blood. And, you go, it might be dead within 10, 20 years, whatever it's going to be. Ties in a lot to what we were talking about last week with the different generations of media.
Yeah.
With how, we're kind of at that final point now. Where do we go from here? And it might be a case of DC getting these fans in young, for example. I say DC because they are doing an actual good job with it. Marvel has the IDW
monthly series, but
it's not but that's already hitting the direct market. You've got to have them in the store already.
However, Marvel has at least started publishing kind of young reader friendly, thick
digest
trades of things like Miss Marvel, Kate Bishop, stuff, Miles Morales, the kind of stuff that you should be using to appeal to new blood. Because Miss Marvel is she's arguably the best Marvel creation since Spider-Man in regards to appealing to a certain youth energy.
With the exception of maybe Miles Morales.
Yes, but because of just how Miles Morales came about.
Yeah.
Miles has got there.
Yeah.
But I don't think he started there.
It's interesting because after I watched Spider-Verse, the film, I went and read because I read Bendis Ultimate Spider-Man. Basically, all of the Peter Parker stuff was like one of the kind of one of the runs that defined my childhood, teenage years, whatever. But then I dropped off when Miles Morales became the new Spider-Man, and then when Spider-Verse happened, I went back and read the Miles Morales stuff. And it's good, but he is basically a Black Peter Parker. There's not really any way of getting around it. He doesn't really have any of the qualities that you associate with Miles now. Whereas in the wake of like the Spider-Verse film and obviously the Spider-Man game, Miles has taken on a much more defining personality, which has filtered back into the comics. And part of me genuinely believes that the reason why that happened is because he was written by a white guy.
Probably. What I will say though is maybe he was written, I don't want to say badly, but not to his fullest extent under Bendis. But Bendis created him and led that feedback loop to happen that now he's a stronger.
Absolutely.
And fundamentally, it's not actually that different to like Superman. Like how much of his early stuff was from the comics, and then okay, we got the radio show and various TV shows, and then there's this feedback loop of okay, now we've got these powers in the comics because they're in this show, and a lot of what Superman is now to us didn't come from the comics originally, it came from these other media. So I think in 20, 30, 40 years time, you can look at Miles and it'll kind of be the exact same situation as what we have with Superman, essentially.
Should be interesting to see if this Ta-Nehisi Coates Superman film does actually end up being a Calvin Ellis Superman film with Michael.
I've seen potential that it'll be Calvin Ellis, which is the President Superman from Earth 9 in Grant Morrison's Action Comics run, or I've again seen speculation it'll actually be Val Zod from the Tom Taylor Earth 2 stuff. Yeah.
Because I'm absolutely game for it. Like,
I mean, honestly, even if it's just Clark Kent, but it's played by, I don't know, Michael B. Jordan's obviously the name that's been floating around a lot. If it's Clark Kent played by Michael B. Jordan, I'm there for it.
Yeah.
I think the
Superman films have been a bit stagnant and have failed to escape the shadow of the Christopher Reeve era because that is so definitive. And I don't, as much as I enjoy Henry Cavill as Superman, he's not exactly had a great run of it with the talent behind the screen.
Not really his fault. Anytime they let him smile, it's like, oh, he is Superman.
There he is.
For me,
I'll be happy for them to let Clark Kent have a rest for a while, especially now we got the Superman and Lois show, which I haven't watched yet, but
I've watched the first 2 episodes, which as we record this is all that's out. It's actually quite good.
Yeah,
as dire as the trailers, as in the trailers seem to make it look quite dour. And
I was so worried going in because, all right, 1, it's a CW show, which already has its own baggage that brings with it. 2, like I say, the trailers looked very Man of Steel-esque visually.
Yeah.
Very dour. 3, the director who did the first 2 episodes said in an interview before he started that he thinks Man of Steel is the peak of Superman's adaptation so far. And I was like, oh God, what is this going to be? And yes, the show does borrow a lot from Man of Steel's visual style. There is a lot of that kind of dour look to it. But it has heart. It has Clark Kent being Clark Kent. Not perfect. He's not, he's still a flawed person, but that's fine. He's not perfect. He shouldn't be, because that's kind of what makes him interesting and human, right?
Yeah.
But he has heart and smiles, and it's like, no, this is actually Clark Kent.
The clip that did the round of him in the classic.
Yeah,
that is like literally the opening of the show is like a recap where it does like a greatest hits. He's in he's in the Fleischer suit. He catches the car like Action Comics 1 style. It does a lot of it does a bit in the planet, which is very reminiscent of the Reeve movies, with the bumbling Clark with the glasses and bumping into Lois. It has all these like little moments of nodding to Superman over the years. Absolutely wonderful.
See, my Superman, and I know the actor himself is far off the.
Okay, I know exactly where you're going with this now.
Days. He's in a. Yeah. But Dean Cain.
No, I have to agree.
I really liked that show as a kid growing up. Really liked it.
They are Lois and Clark for me.
As much as Dean Cain is, it turns out he's a terrible human being and never understood Superman, despite playing him for 3 or 4 years, whatever it was. He was a good enough actor on screen that it came through as Superman, or as Clark Kent.
His costume was great as well in that show.
Yeah.
I think why it works is it's fundamentally a Lois and Clark show.
Yes, that happens to feature some Supermaning every so often.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it is good for that. But before we do for this, do you want to talk about the Marvel approach to what they do with artists?
Yes. So Marvel seem much more willing to just delay.
Yeah.
Like,
I think DC, it depends on the book. Like if it's one of these black label books that is the writer artist combo that they want in the bookstores, they will delay it indefinitely. Like, they are more than happy to take 3, 4, 5 months between issues. I mean, hell, look at Doomsday Clock. That was painfully long between some of those issues.
I didn't even finish reading.
Well, I loved it. But
Doomsday Clock started when I was reading pretty much most of Rebirth, and as it went on, I'd pretty much stopped reading everything.
I think it took either just under or just over 2 full years to get those 12 issues out.
Yeah.
And the first 2 or 3 were monthly, just to put that in context.
Yeah.
So when it's one of those prestige books, when they see it that way, they're happy to delay. When it is one of their workhorse titles, shall we say, just the monthly, this is Batman Detective, Superman Action, they'll slap a fill in. Just like, we're not delaying it more than the bare minimum.
Yeah.
While Marvel do seem more willing to delay.
Yes.
But also at the same time, like, they do use fill-ins, it just feels less noticeable.
There's a weird inconsistency, because I mean, I think a good example of a run that's wrapping up is Immortal Hulk by Al Ewing and primarily Joe Bennett, who obviously has had some issues come out over the last month or two. But before that, I don't think we knew, or at least I have no idea. And he was definitely the primary artist on that book. I'd say he probably did 2/3 to 3/4 of it. There were definitely fill-ins, but it was rarely more than an issue at a time. Occasionally, it was 2 issues if it had like a 2-part story. But I have to say I didn't notice it as much as I did in Tamaki's Wonder Woman run, for example. That we mentioned already, which it's on a completely different scale, and I don't know if it's part of it is Marvel editorial are better at picking artists appropriate to match the ongoing run. I don't know if it's whoever's writing the books is they're being told early enough that this is a different artist, and they're making the conscious choice to write the story differently for that artist.
Yeah.
Just seems to work better. Yeah.
It does, yeah. Which is annoying because I read more DC books and I wish they'd be better.
Marvel haven't. It might be a problem you see less of now that double shipping is completely.
It has gone away. I do hope so. I really do.
Backups and anthologies might help to alleviate it.
Well.
I would expect those backups to be very consistent, at least as well, because they're for the most part only 10 pages. So I would expect those teams to be, those teams, because most artists can handle 10 pages every month.
But what I want though is I just want Astro City to come back.
Probably be waiting for a long time.
Yeah.
Because they're going to be bringing it back just as straight to graphic novels now, and I also wish DC would commit to publishing an omnibus of Astro City, because I've
not done that yet.
Digitally, and I think it's one of the best superhero comics I've ever read. It rebuilt my love of the genre.
It's not part owned by Vertigo / DC. It is fully creator owned, right?
Yeah, it is fully creator owned, but Kurt Busiek, brought it to DC. Vertigo back in 2013, I want to say.
Yeah. It's been back when Vertigo was trying to compete with that Image boom.
Yeah. And I wish they'd just keep it in print because it is so good. And I don't know if either of you have read Astro City, but it's its own unique superhero universe with its own ongoing mythology that's really interesting, but you don't need to know any of that to just pick up a random book. And each book is always from the point of view of a perspective that you won't usually have considered in these sort of storylines. And it's just so inventive. And if you want to get a good feel for it, just pick up the first book, because it's basically 6 issue length standalone issues from the point of view of 6 different characters, and it really raises some interesting questions about superhero universes and continuity. And one of the stories that I remember, I don't know if it's in the first book or one of the later ones, but it's about a family who are moving to Astro City, and everybody's saying to them like, "Why the hell would you move there? There's like all these aliens invading all the time, and there's all
It's
these
the age-old
constant threats.
question,
know.
is it? Why do people live in
Why
the
do
Marvel
people live in
universe?
these cities? You know,
Why do people live in Manhattan?
yeah,
Like,
and it's great. I don't want to spoil the answer.
To be fair, I feel like you could just ask that anyway.
Yeah,
but why do people live in Manhattan?
Yeah, why would you live
I
in
imagine
Manhattan?
it's a decent.
as somebody
city.
who lived in Manhattan for 2 years, it was a fucking nightmare. I can tell you.
Like, to say, like, I'm not just picking on the Americans. Like, why would you want to live in London? Like, really? Why would, like, I get wanting to visit, but why would you want to live there? That sounds like hell.
Manchester's a city I would choose to live in if I was going to pick a city.
Yeah. Living in Manchester is like the best city living experience I've had, even though I moved here a month before lockdown. But, you know,
Tragic.
can't get it right all the time.
Yeah.
Well, I think on that note, we shall say see ya for the episode. Hope you've enjoyed our ramblings on artists and delays.
Basically, we want DC specifically to just do better.
Yeah. DC, do better.
Yes, episode. This is episode 4 of our Definitely Not a DC podcast. We'll definitely next episode. We promise. We'll try and discuss something else.
No DC talk. Got it.
I think we're gonna have to come up with a rule where like every third episode has to be about a comic or a creator who doesn't work at Image, DC, or Marvel, just to really stretch it.
Yeah, I think it's the thing, isn't it? Me and Connor are both very much Western kind of direct market comic readers.
Yeah.
First and foremost,
Making an effort to read more though.
Which is important because today's World Book Day. So
yes, read. It
Read
probably
more.
won't be World Book Day by the time you watch this, but
no.
hey, every day is World Book Day if you want it to be.
I mean, my reading commitment that I've just taken on is The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas, which is 1,300 pages long.
I know this is a topic Andrew wants to get to at some point, but I'm very interested in the upcoming graphic novel adaptation of that.
Yeah, from Europe Comics. It looks great.
Well,
yeah.
I'm very excited to be able to discuss the Disney Dracula
Scrooge.
and Frankenstein
Oh,
things
okay.
when we get to our adaptation.
Oh God, that is so you.
Yeah. But yeah, adaptions are going to be fun. I think we could do an episode on books into comics, films into comics, and then an episode of the other way around. So comics into
TV, movies, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, Marvel Illustrated would be an interesting thing to look at for adaptions as well. There was enough of it to make a big fat omnibus they just released.
Is it that big?
Have they actually released an omnibus?
They just released an omnibus of Marvel Illustrated. Yeah,
might have to get that.
So bad for your spending habits, aren't we?
Oh, terrible. I've not got enough money for all the stuff I want to buy. I'm trying to limit myself to one folio book a month, and it's not working.
Well, because we decided we were going to use Mouse as a way
Topic,
to talk about how to read comics.
Yeah.
Another hint at an upcoming episode there for you guys.
Lots of pipeline.
You order it.
I haven't yet. There's 2 versions on Amazon. The normal been in print forever trade paperback, and then a special edition they released last year. That's a slipcase with the 2 original.
Damn it! Now I'm regretting not getting that.
And it's only £5 more. So it's like, oh, which one do I go for?
I got just the boring old paperback.
Yeah.
But I mean,
wait till you find out about MetaMouse.
What?
MetaMouse. It's another book by Art Spiegelman, which is a 500-600 page book about the making of Mouse.
Oh wait, no, I have seen that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't need it.
Yeah, what you do need to do is finish finish Mouse first.
I did finish book 1, and I decided to take a short break before I jump into book 2.
I don't blame you. Book 2 is horrendous.
At the point of the narrative where book 1 ends, I was like, okay, book 2's the real meaty one, the weighty stuff, where it, by its nature of where they are, it has to be, in the timeline. And I'm like, oh god, I need to build myself up for this.
Yeah, it's a tough read.
Well, again, we seem to be bad at actually ending
That's
our episodes.
Yes, we're done.
Yes. We'll see you next time, guys.
See ya.